Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, October the 8th, 2024. So the thumbnail of this video has a picture of Ursula von der Leyen, who is the President of the European Commission. Now, the reason I've got her picture up there is it's because it's her birthday. It's her 66th birthday. So whatever you think of Ursula von der Leyen, we should wish her a happy birthday. Why not? Now, she does have a trine aspect between Venus and Mars in her chart. And today there is a Venus-Mars trine. So that's really what I'm going to be talking about in this video. What it means to have a trine between Venus and Mars. In theory, it should be quite a fortunate aspect. It should be quite charismatic and attractive. And I'll be looking at examples of people who have Venus trine Mars. It's not a very large sample of people. A couple of events which took place while Venus was trine Mars, to see if we can get any picture about what Venus trine Mars might be about. But before I do that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Tuesday, October the 8th, 2024. Usual reminder, if you like this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to indicate that you did indeed like it. And if you're not subscribed and you like this video, I'd be really happy if you were to subscribe. I'm getting very close to 7,000 subscribers, so it would be kind of quite nice if I could hit that target over the next couple of days. Anyway, so let's look at what's happening today. So here's the positions of the planets for noon today, set for New York. No particular reason why it has to be New York, but it's just a matter of convenience. And you can see that the moon is very much in Sagittarius. There it is. Moon is at 20 degrees Sagittarius. So doesn't matter where you are, that's where the moon is. Whether you're in Sydney, Australia or Los Angeles, the moon is going to be in Sagittarius today. So it's a kind of Sagittarian day. Moon is in a fire sign. It's kind of nice that the moon is in a fire sign, particularly now when we don't have any other sort of planets in fire. Not for the moment. Sure, Venus will move into Sagittarius soon enough, but it's not there yet. And so we need that moon in Sagittarius to give us some spark. It helps get things going. And, when there's nothing in fire, things can feel a little bit flat and lifeless. I mean, okay, that's perhaps a bit of an exaggeration, but yeah, it's good to have moon in Sagittarius. Moon in Sagittarius is open. It can be honest. It can tell the truth. It can be a little bit tactless at times, but there is a certain spark there with moon in Sagittarius. Now, the moon in Sagittarius does make a couple of aspects. It is making an opposition to Jupiter, and it is making a square to Saturn. Now, that square between moon and Saturn is more about the beginning of the day, probably going to be more important if you're in Australia or New Zealand than if you're in America, for example. But we do get this idea that the moon is aspecting both Jupiter and Saturn. So perhaps we get a transition from a moon square Saturn view of the world to a moon opposition Jupiter view. And they are very different. So with moon square Saturn, it may feel that, there might be plenty of spark, but at the same time, it just feels that something is perhaps holding us back, that we can't do everything that we want. And then the moon goes beyond the opposition of Saturn, square of Saturn, and it makes an opposition to Jupiter. So moon opposition Jupiter is a different energy. That's about excess, perhaps. We want more moon opposition Jupiter. It can exaggerate. And in some situations we might know when to stop, not know when to stop. But it's quite a fun aspect, moon opposition Jupiter, provided we don't take things too far. And then the moon, having made the opposition to Jupiter, it makes a sextile to Mercury. And moon sextile Mercury is a really very nice aspect. It's well, I've got moon sextile Mercury in my chart. I've got moon in Aries, sextile Mercury in Gemini. I mean, I think by and large it's quite good in terms of communication, and you get the idea that the two elements of communication, the emotional communication and the sort of mental communication, are working in cooperation. That's for sextile. So perhaps it's a good day for sort of getting our message across. Now, there are two important trines today. Venus is trine Mars and Mercury is trine Jupiter. So Venus trine Mars is an aspect which is it's charismatic, it's attractive, it can be connected with sex appeal, and certainly on the surface it seems a good aspect to have. If we want to appeal to people for whatever reason with Venus trine Mars, now might be the time to do it, and we'll know how to behave, and we'll know perhaps what signals to give, and perhaps our choice of words, our choice of appearance can work very well in terms of getting people to appreciate us. But is Venus trine Mars an entirely good thing? I mean, I will be at the end of this video looking at examples of Venus Mars trines, and there are a few problems with Venus trine Mars. We think that Venus is Venus is a planet connected with love and peace. Well, I don't know about peace, but certainly love and relationships. So you'd expect Venus trine Mars can be connected with getting on with people, getting the right balance. But is that really what it's all about? Venus, in my opinion, there is a connection in terms of Venus with war. It does have a connection with war. I think that it is sort of the planet of victory in a way. I think it's associated. I think one can associate it with the Roman goddess Victoria, which I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the sort of the Greek equivalent is Nike. So I'm not saying that there is a formal connection there. It's just my view of Venus. Maybe I'm being a bit idiosyncratic now. Taking the view that if Mars might be the planet of war, but Venus is a planet of victory and triumph, and perhaps reveling in one's triumph and going further. Taking advantage of people, trying to assert one's control over something. That might be how Venus trine Mars works, or could work, and it could go beyond that. And there is a small amount of evidence that Venus trine Mars could, in certain situations, be connected with a massacre. That might be one way of looking at it. But when one has to ask why would that be the case? Because Venus and Mars is just triumphing over something and just feeling one has the power. And so we're having to see Venus in a completely different way. And with this Venus trine Mars that we've got here is Venus in Scorpio. It's a somewhat difficult sign placement for Venus. Anyway, I'll be talking about Venus trine Mars later in this video. I don't want to give too much away. The other trine aspect we have is Mercury trine Jupiter. So Mercury 21, 22 Libra, trine 21 Libra, trine Jupiter 21 Gemini. I would have thought that is a pretty nice aspect, the trine between Mercury and Jupiter. It perhaps allows some of us to feel optimistic about the future, a belief that things can work out. And from a communicative point of view, it's pretty good. I mean, Mercury is a planet of communication. Jupiter is the planet of hope and optimism. So you put that together, and you get a really nice aspect. Though maybe with a trine, and I suppose this applies to the Venus trine Mars as well. When you've got a trine, there is no resistance, or there's relatively little resistance. So with this Mercury trine Jupiter, there's perhaps some danger, but we talk too much. We talk without thinking about what we're doing, particularly as Moon is opposition Jupiter. So there may be a point where we say one word too many, and that I suppose could get us into trouble. Now, turning to the picture for Sydney, Australia. So if you look at New York at noon, the moon is at 20 degrees Sagittarius. If you go for Sydney today at noon, the moon is at 13 Sagittarius. So if you are in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, or I don't know, if you happen to be in Kamchatka, then perhaps the emphasis is on the moon square Saturn rather than the moon opposition Jupiter. So if you are in Sydney, Australia, perhaps at least in the beginning of the day, you may find that things may be a bit difficult. There may be the potential for so much to happen. There may be the potential to be excited. But to begin with, as the moon makes a square to Saturn, then you might find that it's a slow start, and there are a couple of hurdles to get over. But I think as the day progresses, things will improve, and you can start tuning into the moon opposition Jupiter, provided you don't go over the top with it, and also, of course, Mercury trine Jupiter. So there is a slight difference, but in emphasis there, I would have said, between Australia, New Zealand, and say the Americas. So let's now look at the heliocentric picture. So recently, last couple of days, the heliocentric picture has not been so dramatic. So let's see how things are changing. So here's the position of the planets from a heliocentric viewpoint. That Mars-Jupiter conjunction is getting closer, slowly closer. It was 4 degrees apart, now it's 3.5 degrees apart. And Mars and Venus, now this is kind of quite interesting. Geocentrically, we have Venus trine Mars. Heliocentrically, we have Venus quincunx Mars. So there's Venus, 728 Capricorn, heliocentrically. Mars is 729, again, heliocentrically. So they're 150 degrees apart. So there's a heliocentric Venus-Mars quincunx. I think that very much does emphasize the fact that today is a really Venus-Mars day. There seems to be no doubt about it. And we need to see Venus-Mars in many different ways. Yes, it is a time when we can be attractive, when we can be charismatic. We know what to do to get people's attention. But I think there's a little bit of tension there as well. And things could get perhaps a bit out of control. Maybe there is going to be a sense of triumph today, triumphing over one's enemies, taking advantage of people who are weak. I think that is potentially an aspect of Venus trine Mars. Because you could say that Mars is a slightly malefic energy, perhaps a male energy, and it is able to dominate Venus, which is perhaps a weaker and more feminine energy. That is one way of looking at it. And of course, geocentrically, Venus is in a poor position because it's in Scorpio. So we really do have to consider the symbolism of Venus-Mars today. And I think that it's not necessarily as nice as it sounds. And yeah, we've got Mars-Jupiter conjunction coming up. And that Mars-Jupiter conjunction, yeah, it's about potentially the display of power, how we how we assert ourselves. And yeah, some people are throwing a lot of energy into their various activities, for better or for worse. As it's Mars Jupiter, I don't know, in many cases it might be for worse. So that's the heliocentric picture. And now I want to look at the 12 signs and do my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, October the 8th, 2024. Aries. Aries, you continue to enjoy the moon moving through Sagittarius. I think from an Aries perspective, it is really nice that the moon is moving through a fire sign. You feel energized and you are aware of the possibilities that exist. And to begin with, you might have felt that there were people perhaps sort of denying you these possibilities, telling you can't have it, or you might have felt a bit blocked. And that might be more the case if you're in Australia or New Zealand, because if you're in Australia or New Zealand, then at the beginning of the day there is this moon square Saturn, which could be quite powerful, certainly up until the early afternoon. But it's just something passing that doesn't take away from the fact that you are in an optimistic and expansive mood, and you are aware of possibilities, new possibilities. And as the day progresses, regardless of where you are, you're going to want sort of more and more. And if you're engaged in, conversation or any form of sort of activity that you find exciting, there may be the question of when do you stop? Where do you stop? Is it necessary to stop? So I suppose, Aries, it might be possible to have too much of a good thing. Now, the main aspect today is a trine aspect between Venus and Mars. So Mars is your ruler and Venus is trine Mars. So in a general sense, I would have said that you are at the moment quite charismatic. You're attractive. People find you appealing, and you know how to come across in the best possible way. Now, that does not mean that you have to go over the top. Mars is in Cancer. That's quite a low profile placement for Mars. You don't have to make too much of an effort to get people's attention. You can actually get people's attention just by being yourself. And in fact, perhaps it might be a good idea to keep certain things hidden. If you present yourself in all your glory, then you're giving too much away. You need a little bit of a mystery. I know that mystery and Aries are two words that are not necessarily connected to each other. Aries likes to be up front, but if you can just be a little bit mysterious, keep something back, maybe if you could, to an extent, if you can, maybe try to sort of pretend to be a Scorpio today. I know you're not a Scorpio, obviously, but if you can sort of pretend to be a Scorpio, Aries and Scorpio are the two signs that are both ruled by Mars, and sort of Scorpio, to an extent, is the sort of a more passive and complicated aspect of Mars. And passive is the wrong word, but use it, certainly a more complicated and more intense expression of Mars. And if you can show a bit of intensity and give the impression that you are not just someone who exists on the surface, that there is some kind of hinterland lying beneath that surface, some complex emotional hinterland, I think that that might be useful, and I think that would certainly give a boost to your attractiveness. But at the same time, you do have a lot to say for yourself. with this, Mercury is trine Jupiter. Mercury trine Jupiter is a very talkative aspect, and there are going to be few subjects that you haven't got something to say about. I don't think you're going to be saying the words, I don't know today. I think you're going to have an opinion on most things, but just because you've got an opinion on something doesn't mean that you should, wax lyrical about it. Try to be a little bit subtle today. And I think just with a bit of subtlety, Aries, you will be giving a boost to your power, and you will be making yourself more attractive. Taurus. Taurus, the big aspect today is Venus trine Mars. And that Venus trine Mars asks you to be assertive. Because Mars is the planet of assertion, and Venus is making the trine to Mars, so you could say that the trine is an easy aspect, so you could then say that Venus trine Mars is maybe easy assertion. So if you want to get your way, then I think you can get your way. It should not be difficult, but it may be a case of either you get your way or someone else gets their way. There could be something a little bit competitive about this Venus trine Mars. It's potentially a one-way line of communication. It can go one way or it can go the other way, but it can't go in two ways at once. That is a possibility. So it may be that if you are not asserting yourself, then someone else could be asserting themselves. So you think about that, Venus trine Mars. It's an easy energy. Venus could be invigorated by Mars. Mars is making Venus stronger. Or Mars could be overwhelming Venus. So I think you have to make a decision there. Now, it is quite possible that you don't feel any need to be in control. If you trust the people around you, but you trust the person you're with, then you don't have to worry. You can just go with it, and it'll be fine. But if there isn't that trust, then make sure that you assert yourself, Taurus, straight away with that Venus trine Mars. And it is important, and you I suppose have to have a clear idea about what you want and what you don't want, and push to make things happen your way, and resist if anyone is telling you to do something that you're not comfortable with. So that Venus trine Mars does have to be handled correctly. And so, in this case, I think, Taurus, you do have a certain amount of choice, and you also have to perhaps respect your own inner world. That inner world, that private world that needs to be kept to yourself. This is with Moon and Sagittarius. Moon is in Sagittarius at the moment, and so with the Moon in Sagittarius, from a Taurean perspective, it seems that there is work to be done on your own. You don't have to always be with people. If you're with people, it's difficult to understand what's going on. When you're doing things on your own, you can start to make connections. You can start to discover things. And so it is actually a good day for looking under the surface, for seeing what lies under those rocks, what does lie under those rocks. We have to be careful picking up rocks, because I suppose there might be dangerous animals under the rock, but I suppose that is perhaps symbolic of what today might be about. Perhaps having the courage to explore what's under life's rocks, because there may be something under life's rocks that you really need to take on board. Now, as far as money is concerned, there is an opposition between the Moon and Jupiter today, and that Moon-Jupiter opposition is it's across the finance axis of your solar chart. Not your solar chart. If you are looking at this chart from a perspective of your sun sign, you may be looking at it from a perspective of your ascendant or the moon. It depends how you're looking at it. But let me rephrase that. There's a Moon-Jupiter opposition across the finance axis of your chart, whether that chart may be based on the ascendant or the moon, or indeed could be the sun. And that does indicate that when you start to focus on money, things start to happen, things start to appear. And so by all means, pay attention to financial issues. But if you are going to start to pay attention to financial issues, you can't do it in a trivial way. You have to do it in a way where you are prepared to really focus everything you got on your finances and perhaps uncover things that you weren't aware of. Finally, I just want to go back to that Venus-Mars trine. And of course, that Venus-Mars trine can be about relationships, because Venus is ruler of Taurus, your sign, and Mars is ruler of Scorpio, your opposite sign. So at its best, Venus trine Mars can be about you and another person getting on really well together, finding a real connection with someone. And so if you are in a relationship, or you're trying to get involved in a relationship, doesn't matter what the relationship is about, it can flow very well. Just be careful that you are in control, or at least if you give away control, you know what you're doing. Because I would have said, all things being equal, Mars is stronger than Venus, even though Mars is fallen in Cancer. And so with that Venus trine Mars, you have to ask yourself, in terms of relationships, what are you prepared to give away, what are you prepared to compromise, and what are you trying to achieve. So be very aware of the dynamic there, and make sure that things are happening on your terms. Gemini, there is a trine aspect between Mercury and Jupiter. And this trine aspect between Mercury and Jupiter, I would have said, is pretty fortunate. Mercury is in Libra, Jupiter is in Gemini, Jupiter's in your sign. So with Mercury trine Jupiter, it just feels that things are moving, and it's the fact that it's in air signs, it is very fortunate, and it means that you can really be yourself. You can be a creative Gemini, and I think that there are going to be lots of things you have to say, and at the same time, you should find it very easy, or relatively easy, to relate to other people. There won't be any barriers, not to conversation, to communication. You can say what's on your mind, and I think in many cases people will listen to what you say, and there'll be a good two-way repartee today. So it might be a day when you do want to consider your friends, relationships, your social life. It should all flow very, very smoothly, I think. And I also think that your creativity and your talents and your abilities, it will very much be on show. And so when you are communicating, it's going to be absolutely obvious who you are and what you've got to contribute. And I think at the same time, there will be a great deal of positivity and optimism there. And at the same time, the moon is moving through Sagittarius. And so Sagittarius is your opposite sign. Sagittarius is a sign that is connected with relationships. So with the moon moving through Sagittarius, it is a time when you just know how to get on with people. And the only thing that could stop you getting on with people is a very slight arrogance. I don't even know if arrogance is the right word. It's just this feeling that you may believe that what you're doing is more important than what other people are doing. I mean, you can be friendly, you can be polite, but there's still this feeling that whatever you're doing, whatever you're working on, is fundamentally more important. And I would suggest, Gemini, you let go of that. It's important because it's you. Our own activities are important from our selfish, egotistical perspective. But if you involve other people with what you're doing, you do have to consider their priorities. So do take the time, if you really can, to try to understand what's important to other people, especially on a creative level. And if you feel that there is a clash, that some people have different creative priorities than you, then accept the situation. And it may be a good idea to go your separate ways if it feels there is a creative clash. But I think the best thing to do would be to actually try to understand another person's priorities. It may not feel easy, but if you can just try to put yourself in another person's creative shoes, you might discover something perhaps that you weren't really expecting. But still, Mercury is trine Jupiter. It's a really good aspect. So I would expect today to be pretty fortunate. And Mercury and Jupiter are relationship-friendly planets from a Gemini perspective, because Mercury is your ruler, Jupiter is ruler of Sagittarius, and the moon is in Sagittarius. So from a relationship perspective, I would have expected today to be certainly a lot better than average. Of course, it's always all things being equal. I can't make any guarantees, but if I were to do a star rating in terms of Gemini's potential in terms of relationships today, with 1 star being the worst, 5 stars being the best, I think I'd probably give it 5 stars. So if you want relationships to work out for you, then today I would think you have the best possible chance. Now, finally, there is a square between the moon and Saturn. Now, that Moon-Saturn square is perhaps going to be more of a feature if you are in Australia and New Zealand and East Asia, but you might still feel it. And that moon square Saturn does link with Jupiter. So you've got moon opposition Jupiter, you've got moon square Saturn, and Saturn it's in Pisces, and it's in a high profile part of your chart. And that moon square Saturn and indeed the moon opposition Jupiter may have a certain bearing on how you structure your ambitions. And it may be the case that if there's something you really want that's really important to you, you might think that there is someone holding you back. And in certain situations that might lead to some kind of a clash. But if you do feel that someone is holding you back, maybe you should ask yourself why you think that way. And it may be that a person who appears to be holding you back could actually be in a position to give you some very good advice. Cancer. Cancer The moon is now very much in Sagittarius, and with the moon in Sagittarius, it may be that you feel that there are things that just need to be sorted out, that if you compare what's happening in your world and what's happening everywhere else, you may see a difference. You're trying to create some kind of stability for yourself, and you're trying to put everything in order, yet all the while things are happening. You're aware that things are happening. Today you've got Mercury trine Jupiter, you've got Venus trine Mars. It's all happening very quickly, but it's not necessarily happening to you, and you might feel perhaps relieved about that. Why would you want to be part of this drama? You can watch it from afar, and from your perspective, it's just about making sure that everything is in order. Now, you might come to the conclusion that there are people out there who are just making life too complicated for you, and especially at the beginning of the day, especially if you are in Australia or New Zealand, East Asia, you may feel that some people are just more trouble than they're worth. But it's important to be open-minded and to see where things progress. And if you give people a chance, I do think that you might be pleasantly surprised, especially as there is a trine between Venus and Mars, and this trine between Venus and Mars is having a direct impact on you, because Mars is in Cancer and Venus is in Scorpio, and so that actually allows you to look after yourself. So there's no need to worry too much about other people's influence on you, because when push comes to shove, you will be able to get your way because of that Mars in Cancer. So don't be too worried about that. And if you do think that anyone is in your way, I think that is not actually true. I think that as soon as you start to assert yourself, things really will happen. And I also think that Venus trine Mars is actually quite charismatic, and I think that a lot of people, not just Cancerians, have a certain amount of charisma today. Charisma is a very important word today, charisma and attractiveness. And in your case, it seems that you are able to show the world who you are and what you can do, and I think that people will take you seriously. But I don't think you're in a massively extroverted mood. I think in many cases you would just prefer to do things at your own way, at your own pace. As far as you're concerned, there are things that need to be organized, and as you try to organize things, you are just very aware that you try to organize yourself in one direction, but then in another direction things start to fall apart, and it may just feel at times that you're having a battle against the tide. But if you're able to organize yourself in a sort of broad-minded way, remember Moon is in Sagittarius, so you don't want to focus on tiny little details and making sure that everything is perfectly in order. You've got to have a broader view. If you're trying to create structures around you, then those structures have to be quite porous, because they have to deal with the sands of time. They have to deal with the fact that we don't live in a perfect world, that things can change very quickly. So if you can create a set of structures which are able to bend, when you shouldn't have a rigid view of what's going to happen in the future, of what kind of pressures are going to crop up in the future. Just have a flexible approach, and I think that you'll be able to weather the storm. In fact, you may even be able to benefit from the storm. Leo, at the moment, you are a little bit reserved, actually. I mean, you know that things are happening, and you feel that things are moving your way, and you certainly feel quite a lot of energy, but at the same time, you don't want to give everything away. And in terms of dealing with other people, it does seem that Leos, you feel that you need to hold something back. And I suppose you might give the impression of being slightly standoffish. And I wouldn't worry about that. I think you've got your own priorities, and these priorities you need to focus on them, and you can't be open to everything, open to everyone. That's not possible. And so, in terms of other people, you probably need to choose your friends carefully. There are some people that you do not get on with, or you get on with them to an extent that there's still something a little bit difficult and clunky about it. So I would suggest that you choose your friends carefully, and just realize that today there might be something a little bit awkward about you in certain situations, not in all situations. But the moon is in Sagittarius, so with the moon in Sagittarius, I do think that you do have a great sense of fun, and the moon in Sagittarius is actually making an opposition to Jupiter in Gemini, and I think that opposition between the moon and Jupiter could be exciting. It could be excessive, so there is a possibility that once you get involved in something that you really enjoy, you just don't know when to stop, and you may perhaps not really want to listen to what anyone else is advising or suggesting, and so there might be, for certain Leos, an excessive tinge to today. But I don't want to exaggerate that. I think that Leo, I think in the end, you do know when to stop. So I think that's not something to worry about too much. Though, going back to your reserve, I think part of it is that Leos actually understand certain material priorities, and maybe especially today, when there is actually no Earth there's no Earth around at the moment. Okay, we've got Uranus and Pluto in Earth signs, but there's nothing else in Earth signs, and I'm just thinking that Leo, for some reason, might pick up on that. I mean, I know Leo's a fire sign, not an Earth sign, but you might suddenly wake up and start to think, where is the Earth? Where is the grounding? This isn't real. And maybe you're making yourself somewhat vulnerable, and that might lead to an exaggerated self-interest. And that might actually explain some of your reserve, that you're perhaps thinking about your own security, and you're putting your own security concerns first. And you take the view there isn't much security available. At least that might be how it feels. So you do have to make a special effort to look after yourself. So it's a somewhat mixed day, actually, when you can really enjoy yourself, you can have fun on your terms, but there's still something telling you, that a voice in your ear telling you that it's not quite as it should be. You do have to be careful, and perhaps you're also thinking that certain people, certain situations could undermine you. So you perhaps need to make a special effort to give yourself security, to remind yourself that things are okay on a material basis. I know that there's not much stuff in earth signs, but this situation is not going to last forever. Indeed, the moon will move out of Sagittarius and into Capricorn at a certain stage. I mean, that's in some respects not great from a Leo view, but for some reason grounding could be an issue today, and I think that that's why it's quite a contradictory day. Yeah, you want to have fun, you want to have great fun, but at the same time you want to be secure. And how do you balance that? Virgo, we have got a trine aspect between Mercury and Jupiter, and Mercury is of course your ruler. So if you've got Mercury trine Jupiter, that indicates that things are good. I mean, Jupiter is a fortunate planet. So if Mercury is trine Jupiter, then that indicates that there's a chance that things can really start to go your way, and you can get what you want. Now, when we think about Mercury Jupiter, it's tempting to think about it in terms of enjoying yourself, having a good time, getting on with other people. Yeah, we can certainly see Mercury trine Jupiter as being like that. But first of all, I need to mention that Jupiter is in Gemini. Gemini is a sign in your chart which is connected with ambition and work and where you're trying to move to. And Mercury is in Libra, quite a financially orientated sign that Mercury is in from a Virgoan perspective. So if you've got this with this Mercury trine Jupiter, if money is an issue today, then that Mercury trine Jupiter could actually be very useful in terms of imagining ways of making more money, imagining ways in which you can earn more money. So don't hold yourself back financially. That Mercury trine Jupiter, I'm not going to say financial good luck, because talking about financial good luck, that gives the impression that you're just suddenly presented with, I don't know, a great wad of cash comes from nowhere. It's not like that. It's a kind of thing where you have to actually do something to make it happen. But if you push on a financial door with Mercury trine Jupiter, there is an increased chance that door will open. So if there's some sense in which money is owed to you, or you should be making more money, or you feel you need money with this Mercury trine Jupiter, just consider all possibilities, all reasonable and legal possibilities in which you can give your income and your resources a boost, because it would be a shame to sort of not make the most of the opportunity. But money aside, Mercury's trine Jupiter, it does make you luckier than average, and you're going to come over, I think, as being an interesting person, and I think you'll have a lot to say. And also, Mercury trine Jupiter does have a connection with relationships. So Mercury trine Jupiter, from a Virgoan perspective, can be about getting on well with people in all environments, including a work environment. So if you're going into work today, I think you'll get on better than average with your workmates. But Mercury trine Jupiter, who are the important people in your life? How are you going to bring them into your life, and what do you need to do? And it's important that you just don't assume that you don't have to do anything. you do actually have the capacity to take the initiative today. And if you take the initiative, particularly if it's sort of in a sudden, unexpected way, people weren't planning on it, and you just do something, and you don't do it in any way that is aggressive. It's done in a good-natured way, but it's still surprising. And if you can do that, I think, Virgo, you'll really be able to get people's attention, and that can really move things along, and it may be able to move certain relationships along. Libra, we have got a trine aspect between Venus and Mars, and this trine between Venus and Mars is likely to have an impact on you because Venus is your ruler and it's trine Mars, and this aspect could be very energizing. You feel that something is giving you a lift, and you perhaps have more energy than usual. And the question is, where does this energy come from? And this energy may well come from other people. As a Libran, you are quite sociable, and so with Venus trine Mars, you feel that other people, the right people, not anyone, but people who are on your wavelength, they can really give you a real boost. So this might mean that relationships could work out very well for you, and that, though, does depend on the nature of the relationship. This Venus-Mars trine is in water signs. Venus is in Scorpio, Mars is in Cancer, and so relationships that are already working well should work even better. Relationships with people who you trust should work well, because it is a very emotional trine, and all things being equal, Libra is not the most emotional of the 12 signs. So if you're talking about emotion, we're looking at an area of life that you're not always comfortable with. And so that's why trust is very important. If you trust someone, then you have scope for trusting them even more. On the other hand, if you're dealing with people you don't trust or you don't know very well, potentially the Venus-Mars trine could be a little bit dangerous, because it may make you open to persuasion, or you may be presented with a situation that you don't understand, perhaps because it's too emotional. And because you don't understand the situation, your response to it might not be perfect, or you could be a little bit vulnerable to manipulation. So, I'm sorry to look at this Venus-Mars trine from a negative perspective. I'm not saying it is going to be negative. I'm sure it's going to be fine. But I just thought I would try to look at the Venus-Mars trine in different ways. And it sounds nice, it sounds fun, but in certain situations it can be a little bit dangerous. Though Venus-Mars trine is about attractiveness. It's about you being able to present yourself in the right way, and with Venus making that aspect to Mars, there's no reason why it can't work out in the right way. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. And possibly one way where the Venus-Mars trine could be significant is if you happen to be working, or in terms of business, you could be charismatic, and you will be able to sort of present yourself in the best possible light, and at the same time you may be able to ingratiate yourself with the right people. So I don't know, if there's someone who has got power and control, you'll perhaps know, if you handle things correctly, how to get their attention. And so that can be useful. If you're applying for jobs, I suppose you're trying to impress someone, and so Venus trine Mars may allow you to impress the right person, and so yeah, it could be useful. But I must emphasize that this Venus trine Mars is in water signs. It's not something that you feel entirely comfortable with, and it just might be an energy that you might lose control of. There is another trine that I think is much easier to deal with, and that is a trine between Mercury and Jupiter. Now, this trine between Mercury and Jupiter is in your element. Mercury is in Libra, air sign. You're an air sign. Jupiter's in Gemini, another air sign, and so Mercury trine Jupiter is just about free-flowing communication, being able to communicate about things which are fun and interesting and exciting. And maybe we should actually distinguish between this Mercury trine Jupiter and Venus trine Mars. And perhaps in every interaction you have today, you need to ask yourself, is this a Venus trine Mars interaction, or is it a Mercury trine Jupiter interaction? The Venus trine Mars interactions are going to be more serious, going to be more intense, more emotional, and you're going to have to be on your guard. The Mercury trine Jupiter interactions are going to be just easy. You'll just be able to talk, communicate, nothing will be at stake, and they won't have an emotional core. So whoever you're talking with, as you go through today, make the distinction between, is this Mercury trine Jupiter or is this Venus trine Mars? If it's Mercury trine Jupiter, you can relax and be yourself. Okay, it might be a little bit trivial, it might sort of exist on the surface, but it will be more relaxing. Venus trine Mars, more challenging. I think there's going to be more at stake. I mean, it may be also with Venus trine Mars, there's going to be greater scope for benefit if you can handle the complexities. So that's something that, I would really suggest that you are very aware of, that distinction between those two trines, and don't mix them up. I mean, I suppose you could mix them up, and you might have interactions which have elements of both, but I've just got a feeling that you can divide the two. You can categorize your social interactions in two ways, and I suppose you have to ask yourself how much you're prepared to risk, and whether you want an easy life or a complicated life. And certainly if you want an easy life, perhaps with less scope for benefit, but yeah, certainly safer, just try to focus on the Mercury-Jupiter interactions, which are just going to be fairly light, but I think they will be fun and inspiring and give you access to sort of new knowledge and new ways of looking at the world, but nothing will be at stake. And, really, that's it, Libra. That's the main stuff going on. The moon continues moving through Sagittarius. I think that over the course of the day with that moon in Sagittarius, I think that you're going to be able to communicate very well. I think you can be open and honest, and I think that openness and honesty will very much be appreciated. Scorpio. Scorpio, you are strongly placed because of a trine aspect between Venus and Mars. This Venus trine Mars aspect has been building up for the last few days, but indeed probably about a week, and today it's exact, and Venus is in your sign. Venus is in Scorpio, and it's trine Mars, and Mars is your ruler. So Venus trine Mars makes you a very interesting person. People are going to find you interesting. You're going to be someone who is really very difficult to ignore, even if you are trying to be ignored, because that Scorpio influence is just going to be there. you can't take away from it. That's you, and you are someone who is influential. Okay, you might be influential behind the scenes, but you're still having an impact, and certain people will just find you fascinating. There's something about you that is really interesting, and you don't have to try. You don't have to make a special effort to be interesting, because the fact that you're interesting is just going to just be part of who you are. It's going to be part of what you're emanating, part of your aura, however you want to see it. And so this is a great day for getting what you want, I suppose. You've obviously got to show a certain amount of responsibility, but if there's something you want, then I think there's no reason why you can't get it. So you have to think about, firstly, what you want, whether it's reasonable, and you also have to think about the methods you use, and you've got to be moral. And yes, you can manipulate people to a certain extent, but you don't want to manipulate people just for the sake of it. And so Scorpio, do think about the rights and wrongs of the situation. Now, as far as other people and relationships are concerned, I think it goes without saying that it should be a good day, certainly a better day than average. So, if relationships are important to you for whatever reason, then now might be a good opportunity to to consider the situation, consider who you want to get on with, who you want to ingratiate yourself with, and make a special effort, because people are going to like you. Though I don't think it's a case of missed chance. Yes, Venus trine Mars is exact today, but it's been building up for the last few days. Venus trine Mars will still be in operation over the next few days. So, if you feel that now is not the time for socializing, now is not the time for mixing with people, it's not like you've missed a chance. It's just that the Venus-Mars trine is exact today, and I think that is something that you do need to be aware of. Now, the moon is in Sagittarius, and that kind of gives perhaps a different emphasis to the day. When I was talking about Moon and Sagittarius yesterday, and I think I mentioned, Scorpio, that Sagittarius, from your perspective, can be about money and resources, and so the Moon makes a square to Saturn at the beginning of the day, and it then makes an opposition to Jupiter. And so if you do find yourself thinking about money or engage with money, then there may be some thoughts about the situation. Maybe you might feel that it's perhaps not quite good enough, and that there's something you need to do, and perhaps you're aware that something is holding you back. You may be concerned, for example, about hidden expenses. You look at what you're spending money on, and you think you've understood it, but then you realize that there are these expenses that keep coming up, and they're just difficult to get your head around. But perhaps it's asking you to be a little bit more disciplined and a little bit more focused in terms of what you are spending your money on, because it does seem that certain things are not being taken seriously enough, and that there are ways to reduce your expenditure. And then the moon makes an opposition to Jupiter, and that's also about money, and it's kind of rather different. It's more about excessive expenditure, being aware of the possibility of excessive expenditure, and perhaps looking at something of a financial nature and perhaps losing a sense of proportion. And you have to remember, Scorpio, that today there are no planets in Earth signs. except for Uranus and Pluto. But Uranus and Pluto, they're transpersonal, generational planets. With no planets in Earth signs, Scorpios can just be a little bit too focused on themselves and their feelings, and they can sometimes lose touch with material reality, particularly on a day like this when there aren't many planets. Well, there aren't any personal planets or social planets in Earth signs, and they can lose touch with that. And as a result, you might spend something and not regard the cost. Sorry, you might buy something or commit yourself financially without any consideration to the implications of the move, because there aren't any planets in Earth signs except Uranus and Pluto. So when you are spending money today, particularly if you are spending money, and particularly if it's large sums of money, or if you are making financial commitments, make a special effort to be grounded, to really consider in the real world what the implications of your various expenditures might be. Sagittarius, moon moving through your sign, which is good. And also we have a trine aspect between Mercury and Jupiter. So it does seem, Sagittarius, that there is a lot going on, and I think that there are going to be a lot of things that you want to do, and I think there are things that you believe you can do, and I think that you will have a certain sense of agency, that you can make things happen. You don't have to just be someone who is like a piece of straw on an ocean, just being smashed one way or the other. No, you do have clear agency here with the moon in Sagittarius, and you have a clear sense of what you want to do and what you don't want to do, and you're also aware of what's holding you back, particularly at the beginning of the day, that there may be sort of familial and domestic concerns at the beginning of the day that may be restricting your freedom of action. But I don't think it's anything to worry about. I think just let a bit of time pass. It must just maybe a few hours, and things will free up, and there will be a sort of a sense that things are happening. And so if you feel that you need to do something, now actually might be the day to do it, because the moon is in Sagittarius, is in your sign, but it won't be in Sagittarius forever. It will move into Capricorn, and so with the moon moving into Capricorn, that's different. It may be a sense in which you've lost your chance. So if you really have a strong feeling that something needs to be done, then perhaps today is a day in which you should do it. And you're helped by the fact that Mercury is making a trine to Jupiter. So this trine to Jupiter, you've got Mercury in Libra, trine Jupiter in Gemini. That allows things to really, really move. And I think that you'll get on very well with other people. Your social skills should be pretty good today. And if there are people you want to talk to, if you want to, I don't know, talk to someone you've never talked to before, now might be a good chance to do it. Indeed, if you leave it too long, you might miss your chance. And that Mercury trine Jupiter just allows your brain to work in a particular way. It allows you to be more open-minded than usual, and to think of possibilities, and also to think about what makes you unique. And if you have something about you that you regard as being unique, you've got a unique contribution, then Sagittarius now would be the chance to really make it clear. It is your chance. If you leave it until tomorrow, then you might have missed your chance. When the moon goes into Capricorn, things will change. I mean, it's not that it's necessarily a bad change, the moon moving into Capricorn. It's just that things are going to be a little bit more grounded, perhaps a little bit more boring when the moon goes into Capricorn. So while the moon is in Sagittarius, it may be a question of sort of making hay while the sun shines. Now, that Mercury trine Jupiter is also relevant to relationships of all natures, close relationships in particular. So you and another person can get on very well. From a relationship perspective, it is a good day. Assuming astrology works, all things being equal, if one wants to use astrology to try to evaluate a day, then from a Sagittarius perspective, it's got to be good because of that trine between Mercury and Jupiter. And so if you have a chance to get closer to someone or to improve a relationship, or perhaps you and someone else have recently fallen out, then now is a good opportunity to make links or perhaps patch things up, whatever needs to be done. So overall, Sagittarius, it strikes me as being a very good day. Moon is in Sagittarius after all, and Mercury is making a trine to Jupiter. So, don't waste today. And, some things just have to be done. And if you assume that things are just going to carry on like this forever, then, you might miss your chance. So I suppose the general message, Sagittarius, is just make the most of it. Capricorn. I've been talking to the 12 signs, and I've been talking about Venus trine Mars and Mercury trine Jupiter. These are fun aspects, or certainly they're interesting aspects. I don't know about the Venus-Mars trine being fun, but certainly the Mercury trine Jupiter is fun. But I don't think that those two trines have a direct impact on you. I don't think that you need to worry about about their influence, and perhaps you can regard them as being optional. So, in astrology, I do distinguish between the 12 signs, and I'm sort of saying that, one sign is more likely to be impacted by a Venus trine Mars, for example, than another sign. Now, that doesn't mean to say that these aspects don't have a generic quality. So, regardless of your sign, Mercury trine Jupiter is good for communicating. So, Capricorn, if there's something you want to say, then you can join the party, and you are going to be able to get your message across loud and clear. But it's up to you. You can become part of it, or you can be part of it, but you don't have to be part of it. If you feel you just want to do your own thing and keep a low profile, that's absolutely fine. Also, we've got Venus trine Mars. Venus trine Mars is an aspect, can be very much connected with relationships, creating relationships, getting close to people. It doesn't necessarily affect you directly. It's not something that you have to take advantage of, but I should point out that Mars is in Cancer. Mars is in your opposite sign, and Venus is trine Mars. And so with that Venus trine Mars, there are perhaps going to be people who are attractive and charismatic and who are perhaps trying to get your attention, and that might be something you want to consider. Now, Venus trine Mars, it's quite a complicated trine because Venus is in Scorpio, Mars is in Cancer, water signs can be complicated. And so just because someone is trying to get your attention doesn't necessarily mean you should reciprocate. It may be that there is someone who you really don't need to have in your life, who is not going to be helpful, but nonetheless there may be a temptation to interact with them. So in terms of close relationships, Capricorn, probably a little bit of reflection is required. There's certainly no need to commit yourself, and it's okay to be suspicious. You can be suspicious. I suppose many Capricorns do have a suspicious nature, And if you ask yourself about what people's motives are, then you might soon enough reach some conclusions and be in a better position to make judgments. Now, this Venus trine Mars could also have an impact on your career or your business, if that's relevant. And so with that Venus trine Mars, it does seem that some people actually can be useful in terms of helping you get what you want. And these people, they might be somewhat difficult. I'm not saying it's going to be completely easy. You're perhaps dealing with people that you don't entirely get on with, but at least in the short term, they might be useful, and it might be a good idea to try to engage with them. I think a bit of caution is required, but in terms of career, work, business, you shouldn't necessarily feel that you have to do everything on your own. And I think that some support is available, and that support may come from a quarter that you're not entirely comfortable with, but nonetheless, in the short term, it just might be the right thing to do. So I wouldn't discount the possibility of getting outside help. But overall today, I do think that there is no real pressure to do anything, and I do think you have a great deal of choice today. So to a great extent, it can be the day you choose. Yes, there are opportunities which can be symbolized by Venus trine Mars, Mercury trine Jupiter. The opportunities are there, but if you don't want to avail yourself of the opportunities, or if you feel these opportunities are just not right for you, then I think it's okay to pass them by. Aquarius, we have got a trine aspect between Mercury and Jupiter. And this trine aspect does have an impact on you because, Mercury is in Libra, Jupiter's in Gemini. These are two air signs. You're an Aquarius. So there's this grand trine feel to it. Okay, I know it's not a grand trine because there's nothing in Aquarius, but Aquarius is the missing air sign. And so with that trine between Mercury and Jupiter, both trining Aquarius, your sign, I think that there is a certain sense of optimism, and I know that many Aquarians are not particularly optimistic people because Aquarius is Saturn ruled. There is a fundamental realism to many Aquarians, but still, I do believe, Aquarius, that you're able to see things in a positive light, and if you open your eyes and you listen, you'll start to realize that things are happening out there which really work in your favor. So listen to what people are saying. Try to understand what messages they're giving, and it's not just people; it's just the way the world is moving. And so there's plenty there to inspire you. And with this Mercury Jupiter, you're also just going to get a great sense of your own role, and so it's a good idea to try to work out how you can take advantage of everything. I mean, just because you take an advantage of something doesn't mean that someone else loses. Everyone can be a winner here with that Mercury trine Jupiter, and there is something generous and optimistic about that trine, which you can become part of. Now, there is another aspect going on today, another trine, and that is a trine aspect between Venus and Mars. And this Venus-Mars aspect is more about how you move forward in life, because Venus is in Scorpio, And with Venus in Scorpio, you have a sense of what you're trying to achieve, and also there's a certain self-consciousness about Venus in Scorpio from an Aquarian view. And I've talked about this before. I think at the moment you're very aware of how people are seeing you, and that's especially the case in a public sense. Okay, if you stay all day at home, then okay, that's not such a concern. But if you are out there in the public eye, being, for example, at work, or being involved in some activity which involves lots of other people, you are in public to an extent, and you are very aware about how you are being perceived. And I think that has been a feature of Venus moving through Scorpio. And Venus is now making a trine to Mars, and this might mean, Aquarius, that the way you carry yourself in a public sense is getting attention. And with that Venus trine Mars, I would have said that it's favourable attention. It's making an impression, and there are people out there who I think they think you've got something to offer, and I think in many respects you come over as being quite an attractive person who's got something to say, and I think people are going to be interested in you. I mean, I suppose it's kind of up to you. You don't have to adopt some sort of public role for yourself. You don't have to be seen if you don't want to be. But if you are being seen, if you are interacting with people, then you are making an impression, Aquarius. And I do think that impression is overall going to be quite favourable. And you really mustn't underestimate yourself. And it is a time when you're able to talk about what you can do, because people don't know you. Or at least some people know you, but not everyone knows you. They don't understand what you have to offer, what your abilities are. People, you mustn't assume they do, but people maybe they don't know. And so it's okay to tell people what you can do. It's not boasting. It's just being very matter of fact about it. By the way, I can do this, and I can do this, and maybe it's going to be useful to you. So in that sense, when you're talking about what you're good at, I think, Aquarius, it's important that you're not shy. Pisces. So Pisces, we have got two trine aspects. So in that sense, it's quite rare today to have these two exact trines. And we've got Mercury trine Jupiter, and we've got Venus trine Mars. And in a way, both those aspects are important to you. So Mercury trine Jupiter, of course, Jupiter is your ruler. So if Mercury is trine Jupiter, Mercury is a planet of communication, that would indicate that you are really able to tell people who you are, what you want, and expressing yourself should be relatively easy. So do take advantage of that Mercury trine Jupiter. It doesn't mean to say that you have to be a wild extrovert. Communication can happen on many different levels. It can happen on quite a subtle level, and you don't have to. You certainly don't have. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to make a special effort to meet anyone. You just are able to express yourself, explain yourself if need be, and I think you can do it in a way that is quite subtle, that's not over the top, that doesn't cause any aggravation. So do make the most of it. And in fact, you're able to explain some of your security concerns. We all have security concerns. There are things you would like to happen to make yourself feel safer and more grounded. Definitely, there are things you've got on your mind. You'd like it all to happen, but today you perhaps have a chance to explain it, to tell people what's on your mind, to tell people what's bothering you. And, I'm not saying that you're talking about anything that's really dreadful. I'm not talking about deep fears, because, if you feel more secure, then you have more freedom. And so you can explain things to people, and I think they will understand it. And I think that is going to make your life better, because you might actually find that people and organizations are prepared to act in such a way that is in your interest, but you've got to give them a cue first. And that can just come with perhaps a conversation that just happens, that just occurs. Okay, you might want to seek out that conversation, maybe by making a phone call or a visit, but I'm not saying you have to go anywhere today. I don't think it's necessarily that kind of day, although we shouldn't forget that the moon is in Sagittarius. And so with the moon in Sagittarius, I think that you're probably going to be more ambitious than usual. And the moon does make a square to Saturn, and that moon square Saturn is going to be particularly strong if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but I think all of us will feel that moon square Saturn. And that moon square Saturn is going to be quite focused on what you want. And there's certainly things that you want. And with this Mercury trine Jupiter, I'm very confident that you can tell people what you want. Now, we've also got a trine aspect between Venus and Mars. And this Venus-Mars trine is in water signs. You've got Venus in Scorpio, and you have got Mars in Cancer. And of course, the third water sign is Pisces. So the Venus-Mars trine has a direct impact on you and your sign. And I would have thought that from an emotional perspective, this aspect really makes things flow. Pisces is really being helped and facilitated by this trine, and you can really get into what it means to be a Pisces, and I think that you're able to express your Piscean nature very well, and your sensitivity is perhaps going to be very much on show. You're going to be able to demonstrate to the world that you are compassionate and sensitive, and I think Pisces, that people are going to like you with this Venus-Mars trine. Venus-Mars as a pairing is about charisma and attractiveness, and it's going to be a part of your self-expression. So if there's anyone you want to convince or persuade, then you can do it. And I think you're going to be helped by the fact that it's all working on an emotional level. You understand emotions. You understand the enormity of the sea, the emotional sea in which we're all existing. And, other people, not quite so emotional. They work in different ways, in different modes. But no, this is your territory. So that does really make you persuasive. And, once people move towards you, they do move into your territory. They do move onto emotional ground. And yeah, it's your territory. So in that sense, you certainly have a lot of control. I mean, that brings responsibility. Yes, you're able to persuade people to perhaps have particular ideas, or persuade them that maybe you're the right person for them, or that you should be trusted. So that you do have this great persuasiveness working on a completely emotional level. But, persuasiveness is not always a good thing. So you have to make sure, Pisces, that you act in a way that is responsible. So that's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And I now want to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 53. which is development. And this hexagram doesn't move. And so the idea of development is it's about moving gradually towards whatever our goal might be. It's not a day for doing things quickly. And so in a way this contradicts what the astrology was saying. I was talking about the moon in Sagittarius, and we had Mercury trine Jupiter, and there seemed to be a sense of perhaps things moving quickly, but the I Ching is saying, yeah, there is progress. Things are moving. We are moving closer and closer towards the achievement of our goals, but it does take time, and we shouldn't be in a hurry. And I know this is just a hexagram, just a reading for the day, but maybe we should be thinking over the next sort of couple of days or even a week or more. So if there's something that you're working on that you're perhaps in a little bit of a hurry to achieve, don't be in too much of a hurry. You should be satisfied with small gains, small benefits, but to really get to your destination, it's going to take quite a long time, but you are making progress all the time. Now, this hexagram is locked. It doesn't move. And that kind of slows it down even more because it doesn't move. It's just development, moving in a direction, but it's a bit vague as to how we actually get there, when we actually get there. And it might then be useful to look at the nuclear hexagram, the hexagram that underlies this hexagram. So the nuclear hexagram, remember, we take off the top and the bottom lines, so we look at those middle 4 lines, and the nuclear hexagram is hexagram 64, which is before completion. So when we're looking at this concept of development, we just need to remind ourselves that we're not there yet. It is not finished. And with this hexagram 64, there's always this warning that if we are in too much of a hurry and if we're not careful enough, then we could get ourselves into trouble. The image of before completion is crossing a river, and we don't want to get wet. We don't want to fall in, and if we're not careful, we could fall in. And so before completion, we haven't reached the other side of the bank. So going back to development, this is telling us how we get to the other side of the bank. We have to do it slowly and incrementally, and that is the way forward. So that's it with the I Ching. I think it's fairly brief, maybe a bit too brief. And now I want to consider the Venus-Mars trine. So today there is this trine aspect between Venus and Mars. So the question is, what does it mean when Venus is trine Mars? So the pairing of Venus and Mars is going to be about attractiveness, and it's going to be about how we get on with people and what makes us appealing. And Venus is the planet of female sexuality, Mars is the planet of male sexuality. So you put them together, and someone with a Venus-Mars aspect may be attractive and charismatic. But we do have to consider what the aspect actually is. I think a conjunction, an opposition, or a square is going to work differently from a trine. The conjunction, squares, and oppositions are much stronger aspects. They're more dynamic. They're probably going to be more noticeable. So, for example, someone with Venus square Mars could be very attractive, but their attractiveness could be specific. It could be focused on certain types of people. Certain other types of people may find that Venus square Mars unattractive. So I suppose it could be a sense of attractiveness being in the eye of the beholder. Venus trine Mars is kind of easier going. a trine is not as strong an aspect as a square, an opposition, or a conjunction. It's just someone who perhaps is generally able to be attractive, but not in a super intense kind of way. It's kind of easygoing, and maybe it's just not going to be so noticeable. So I thought I would look at some examples of people who have Venus trine Mars in their charts. I also want to look at some events when Venus was trine Mars, and of course, one of the people I wanted to look at was Ursula von der Leyen. It's not just Ursula von der Leyen's birthday today, it's the fact that she actually has a Venus trine Mars in her horoscope. So it's her 66th birthday. So remember, Ursula von der Leyen is the president of the European Commission. So she's almost like the head of state of the European Union, and she is a very powerful person. And so let's look at her chart. So here is Ursula von der Leyen's chart. So she was born on October the 8th, 1958. I don't have a time of birth for her, and she was born in Belgium. So I would have said with Ursula von der Leyen, she was active in German politics, and she, I suppose, in some respects, did well in German politics in the sense that she got to a fairly exalted position. But I think the general consensus is that she was not really very good at her job. I think she might have been German Minister of Defense, perhaps, but she was not considered to be particularly effective. I think she doesn't really get a very good press in terms of the European Union. She just seems to be above her pay grade. I mean, that's my impression of her. What is she doing in this position? Yet she stays in this position. And maybe this is the fact that she has in her horoscope Venus trine Mars. Venus trine Mars is very good at getting on with people. There's her Venus in Libra, trine Mars in Gemini. And so Venus trine Mars, it's attractive. It's charismatic. People like her. People like her so much they want to give her jobs. And so it works well for her. And she also has that Mars. It's not just trine Venus. It's also square Pluto. So she's got Mars square Pluto. And so maybe that gives us the idea of someone who is quite ambitious. Regardless of her talent deficit, she gets what she wants. She really pushes it. And maybe with Mars square Pluto, Mars might be a sort of as a male planet. Perhaps she gets the support of men, and they help push her in terms of her achieving her ambitions. So it's quite a strange chart in that sense. It's a shame we don't have a time of birth for her. She does have a moon in Leo conjunct Uranus. We don't know exactly where her moon is because we don't have a time of birth. But moon in Leo, she probably has quite a high opinion of herself. Moon is moon, female planet. I mean, in a way, her moon in Leo is more important than her sun in Libra. I think off the top of my head, Margaret Thatcher had sun in Libra and moon in Leo. But I don't think Ursula von der Leyen is quite cut from the same cloth as Margaret Thatcher. She's definitely not in Margaret Thatcher's league, whatever you think of Margaret Thatcher. But she's just into power. That's what she's into, Mars square Pluto. And the Venus trine Mars does seem to serve her quite well. But anyway, it is her birthday, so I do want to wish her a happy birthday. Now, someone who is probably more talented than Ursula von der Leyen was Elon Musk. So Elon Musk has a trine between Venus and Mars. So here is Elon Musk's horoscope. You can see that he has his Venus at 19 Gemini and his Mars at 21 Aquarius. So I suppose you could say that Elon Musk is a charismatic figure, and you could say that he is utilizing his Venus-Mars trine. As far as relationships are concerned, well, I suppose Elon Musk has, I believe, had quite a lot of relationships, and he has had quite a lot of children. I don't know whether that has anything to do with the Venus trine Mars, but this may also say something about his business abilities. Elon Musk, I believe he's the richest person in the world, and he's a Cancerian. Not surprising. Cancerians, when it comes to being super rich and super successful and famous, they do have an advantage. Julius Caesar was a Cancerian. Apparently Alexander the Great was a Cancerian. It's a good sign to have if you want to be super rich and super famous. But one has to ask, why is he so rich? Is it because he is just an innovator? I mean, I would have said probably not. I think that he understands the trends. He understands what's going on in the world around him. He's quick to jump on bandwagons. And, whether that's technology or even political bandwagons, you could say. He recently, or just a couple of days, was it Saturday? Didn't he spoke at, was it a Trump rally in Pennsylvania? So he understands the way things are going. And Venus trine Mars, if you want to be successful in business, it's not just enough to invent things. You've got to be persuasive, and you've got to communicate, and you've got to have a certain charisma. And I suppose he's got that Venus trine Mars. Now, in the introduction, when I talked about Venus-Mars aspects, I suggested that perhaps if you had a hard aspect between Venus and Venus-Mars square, your attractiveness might be particular. Certain people might be attracted to you, certain people might find you repulsive. And I suppose you could say with Venus trine Mars, there are some people who think that Musk is very charismatic and attractive, but there are other people that can't stand him. And I suppose the fact that he's now supporting Trump is going to increase that polarization even further. Now, Venus and Mars might also be connected with gender issues and transgender issues. And recently he was interviewed about his son, who he's fallen out with, and his son has decided to become a woman, and this has clearly really upset him. He did an interview. He was really, really angry about it. No doubt about that. And I think he did an interview with Jordan Peterson. But the transgender issues have had an impact on him. So another person who's got Venus trine Mars, who has had their life impacted by transgender issues, someone you might not have heard of if you're not in the UK, is a British member of Parliament called Rosie Duffield. And Rosie Duffield, she was born on July the 1st, 1971. So she was a Labour member of Parliament. And I think she was first elected in 2017. And she fell out with the Labour Party, or many sections of the Labour Party, because of her views on transgender issues. I think she was sort of saying a woman is a woman, and she was not particularly comfortable with the way things were going with this obsession with transgenderism, or an obsession perhaps as she saw it. And by saying that a woman is a woman and seeing it as something biological, there were activists within her Labour Party that she got into a lot of trouble with. She couldn't go to Labour Party conferences because she was concerned about being attacked. It seemed that the leadership of the Labour Party didn't support her, and I think about a week ago, even though she was elected as a Labour member of Parliament, she left the party and became an independent. And not because of transgender issues, it was, I think, because of the government was stopping payment to fuel subsidy to pensioners. But anyway, she left the Labour Party, and she's got Venus trine Mars. So I suppose with Venus trine Mars, I suppose if you want to be a politician, even just a humble member of parliament, it certainly helps to have Venus trine Mars. You've got to get on with people. I mean, I think that she came from a sort of relatively humble background. I think she was a teaching assistant in Canterbury, I think. Then she got involved in politics, and then she became elected as a member of parliament for Canterbury. But she has Venus trine Mars, and I'm just wondering whether, if you've got Venus trine Mars, it may create a situation where transgender issues have an impact on her life. And I think she got a lot of support from J.K. Rowling, who I don't think has a Venus Mars aspect, but that's Rosie Duffield, and maybe that's with the transgender issues she's been having. Maybe that just is a reminder that the Venus trine Mars is about gender, or can be about gender. Turning to the US, Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson has Venus at 15 Aries and Mars at 14 Sagittarius, so he's got Venus-Mars trine. I think that Tucker Carlson, perhaps like Elon Musk, we're seeing someone who, a lot of people really like Tucker Carlson. A lot of people can't stand him, but he comes over, I suppose, as being smooth and charismatic, and he's obviously a good communicator, and he's got friends. He knows how to get friends. He knows how to, I suppose, get people to be interviewed by him, even like Vladimir Putin. So you can see, perhaps as a journalist, as a high-profile journalist, how having a Venus-Mars trine could really be very useful. And another final person I want to look at before I look at events is General Zaluzhny. He used to be the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, and he has got Venus in Leo, trine Mars in Aries. And you could see Venus-Mars in his case as being about charisma. I think one of the reasons he was fired as commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, regardless of his competence or lack of it, was that he was charismatic and he had political support. There are a lot of people in Ukraine who regarded him as a possible candidate to be president. So he may have been commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian army, but he was also playing political games and getting a lot of support, not just in the Ukraine, but also in the West. And it was perceived that he might have been a better president than Zelensky. Remember, there was supposed to be a presidential election, I think a few months ago. Zelensky's term ran out. I think it ran out in the spring. So he should have stood down and there should have been an election, but he didn't stand down. So you could argue that Zelensky is sort of illegally president. And Zaluzhny was one of the rivals for that position, and perhaps he could have been elected because he seemed to have greater popularity than Zelensky, and maybe his Venus trine Mars was helping out. Now, I want to consider a few events which have Venus trine Mars. I'm not saying that these events necessarily really reflect Venus trine Mars. It just may be a matter of coincidence. So actress Natalie Wood, she died on November the 28th, 1981. And so this death, people go on and on about it. I mean, it was a long time ago, 1981. What's it, 43 years ago. But people still haven't forgotten the drowning of Natalie Wood. And at the time of the drowning, Venus was at 22 Capricorn, Mars was at 21 Virgo. And so you could see Venus as the woman, Venus as Natalie Wood, and Mars in Virgo, well, it all happens easily. Mars might be the bad event. I mean, even though Mars is not in a water sign, somehow that Venus-Mars trine sums up the event. Maybe the Venus-Mars trine at the time of the event ensured that the event would remain just iconic. Maybe that Venus-Mars trine is, perhaps, a bad thing happening to a woman. Look at Venus. Venus is actually conjunct the South Node. So Venus conjunct the South Node, trine Mars could represent the high profile death of a high profile woman. A woman can also be a victim of a kidnapping or an attempted kidnapping. So in 1974, there was an attempt in London to kidnap Princess Anne, and it failed. And still, though, Venus was at 14 Aquarius, Mars was at 12 Gemini. So you could see Mars. Look at this time. Mars is on the South Node in 1974. So Mars perhaps is the aggressor. Venus trine Mars. It was amazing that he was able to get so close to her. He was able to open her car door. He was able, I think, to point a gun at her. So it all happened very easily, but it didn't work out. I don't think Princess Anne was particularly cooperative. I think shots were fired, and it failed. But perhaps Venus-Mars trine does indicate some potentially dangerous event happening to a high-profile woman. Certainly, Princess Anne was in 1974 still a very a very high-profile woman, and that could be how Venus-Mars trine is working. Now, let's look at some really unpleasant events with Venus trine Mars, and let's look at a massacre which took place with. This is the Kysielin massacre, which happened on July the 11th, 1943. Now, it's a Second World War event, so it's in the Second World War, there were massacres and horrible things happening pretty much every single day of the war. But this massacre the victims of this massacre were Poles, and the perpetrators of this massacre were Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians had a sort of generalized attack on the Polish population in what is now Ukraine, but what was before at the time I think was sort of in Poland, or part of Poland that had been taken over by Russia or the Soviet Union. And so a lot of Poles were massacred on July the 11th, 1943. And so there is Venus. There's Venus at 255 Virgo, and Mars at 223 Taurus. So how does this relate to Venus trine Mars? And I'm just suggesting here we might be seeing a very unpleasant side of Venus. Ukrainians taking advantage of the situation. Perhaps, the Ukrainians who were in many respects supported by Nazi Germany. I mean, I don't think Nazi Germany was necessarily involved in the massacre itself. I don't know. But they perhaps felt that they were in a position of strength, and they were able to utilize this position of strength to massacre a civilian population of Poles. And that may be how Venus-Mars works, seeing Venus not as the planet of relationship, but at the planet of victory. Mars is about aggression; it's victory. We are establishing our control over the situation in a horrific way by killing all these Poles. And of course, this massacre hasn't gone away. It's still a major bone of contention between Poland and Ukraine, although given the history, and I think 100,000 Poles were killed by Ukrainians, it's kind of amazing, isn't it, how the Poles are so sympathetic towards the Ukrainians. I suppose animosities against Russia, that's interesting. I suppose the Poles were thinking about the Katyn Forest massacre, which the Poles haven't really forgiven the Russians for. Though it's interesting with the Katyn Forest massacre, 2 of the 7 people who signed off on the Katyn Forest massacre were actually born in Ukraine. So there's kind of perhaps something going on here. So let's look at another massacre, which still has a big impact on the world. It's not just a massacre, it's a pogrom. And it had actually relevance to October the 7th. So October the 7th was when we had Hamas last year, when you had over 1,000 Israelis were killed by Hamas. And okay, there are echoes of Nazi Germany, but I think a lot of people were making a comparison not with what happened in Nazi Germany, but they were making a comparison with the Kishinev pogrom, which a Kishinev pogrom took place in 1903 in what is now Moldova, but at the time it was part of the Russian Empire, and so at the time of this pogrom, Venus was at 1 degree Gemini and Mars had just moved into Libra. So Mars was opposition the Aries point, and that makes Mars very, very powerful. And then it aspects, but then you have the trine to Venus. And so with the pogrom, the Jewish population in Kishinev were attacked, and this pogrom, led a lot of Jews fled to the west as a result of this pogrom. Maybe even if they didn't live in Kishinev, it was just seemed to suggest the way things were going, and it was a very sort of Russian thing. And I think a lot of people haven't forgiven the Russians for their anti-Semitism during the time of the Russian Empire, and the Kishinev pogrom was a particularly awful example of Russian anti-Semitism. And so Venus trine Mars is about taking advantage of a vulnerable population, perhaps as we saw with the Kiselian massacres, which took place in 1943. So perhaps we need to rethink what Venus-Mars trine is all about. And finally, there's Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany had a trine between Venus and Mars. Nazi Germany had Venus was exactly on the midheaven. This is when Hitler came to power. Venus was exactly on the midheaven, and you can see pretty much on that day there was a precise Venus trine Mars. And I do see this as being about, from the Nazis' perspective, victory, isn't it? I mean, they finally made it. They got it. They've seized power. And this is Venus. Forget Venus perhaps as a planet of relationships. Venus is a planet of victory. They are being successful. Venus trine Mars. And I think that this emphasizes the point that there is potentially something very brutal about the Venus trine Mars, at least in terms of events. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about Venus trine Mars. I hope you found this video of some interest. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you are not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.